In 1986, a 20-year-old man got in his car, drove down a dirt road in the middle of rural Maine, stepped out, and walked into the forest without leaving a note, without telling anyone where he was going, and without saying goodbye to a single person in his life. And for the next 27 years, nobody found him, and what makes that even stranger is that he wasn't hiding somewhere remote or impossible to reach. He was right there, just a few miles from the nearest town, concealed in the woods behind a cluster of ordinary summer cabins, while police searched, while a game warden spent years trying to track him, and while the locals slowly began to wonder if what they were dealing with wasn't a person at all, but something closer to a ghost. His name was Christopher Knight, and what he did out there, how he survived it, what he felt during those years, and what he said in the moment he was finally caught, is one of the strangest true stories I have ever come across, because when psychiatrists eventually evaluated him, they found no disorder, no psychosis, nothing diagnosable at all. By every clinical measure available to them, he was completely sane. He had simply looked at the world around him, decided it wasn't something he wanted to be part of, and then acted on that decision with a kind of quiet, absolute commitment that is almost impossible to fully understand. To make sense of what he did, you have to first understand what he was walking away from. He grew up in Massachusetts in the 1960s and 70s, and even as a child, his family described him as unusually self-contained. Not unfriendly exactly, but deeply interior, someone who read constantly and thought carefully and never quite seemed to fit the rhythm of the social world around him. By 1986, he was 20 years old, holding down a job and living what looked from the outside like a perfectly ordinary life, until one day he got in his car and drove north without a plan, turned down a dirt road he had no particular reason to take, parked the car, got out, and walked into the trees. The last person he spoke to before his disappearance was a hiker. He passed on a trail somewhere in those first hours, and they exchanged a brief glance before Knight said hi and the hiker said hi back, and that was it. That was the last conversation Christopher Knight would have for 27 years, a single syllable before nearly 3 decades of silence. And while he was out there, the entire world he had left behind kept moving without him. The Berlin Wall came down, the internet was born, September 11th reshaped the country, and an entire generation of people grew up knowing nothing about a man named Christopher Knight, quietly reading by flashlight in the Maine wilderness, waiting for the snow to stop. What he did to survive is where the story shifts from strange into something genuinely remarkable. He didn't build a cabin or hunt game or live off the land in any of the ways that survival stories usually go. Instead, he stole, but with a precision and care that made him nearly invisible for over 2 decades. Over 27 years, he broke into more than 1,000 summer cabins in the area surrounding his camp, taking only what he needed and nothing more, leaving behind almost no evidence that a person had been there at all. No forced entries, no missing valuables, just small quantities of food, propane, warm clothing, batteries, and books, taken so carefully that many cabin owners couldn't be certain whether they were being robbed or simply misremembering what they'd left behind. The locals had long understood that something was out there, and over the years the story of the North Pond Hermit had grown into a kind of regional legend, somewhere between a persistent mystery and a ghost story that people told around the lakes. A game warden named Terry Hughes became quietly consumed by the case and spent years setting up stakeouts and surveillance without ever getting close, while some of the cabin owners, rather than feeling violated, began leaving food out in the open as a kind of unofficial offering to whoever was living out there in the dark. Knight's camp itself was so well hidden within a dense tangle of trees and granite that in 27 years, not a single person ever stumbled onto it by accident, which speaks to either extraordinary luck or an almost obsessive attention to concealment that he maintained every single day without exception. The winters are what I find hardest to wrap my mind around. Central Maine in January is not a place where people survive casually, with temperatures dropping to around -20 Celsius and staying there for weeks at a stretch. The kind of cold that is genuinely dangerous even for people with proper shelter and heating. Knight had a tent and a collection of stolen thermal layers, and because he understood that a fire would produce smoke that could be seen from a distance, he never lit one, not once in 27 winters. Instead, he learned to endure the cold through stillness, sitting completely motionless for hours at a time during the worst stretches, conserving heat through sheer discipline until the temperature became survivable again. He developed a system for managing the cold, so sophisticated and so precisely calibrated that across all those years he never suffered serious frostbite, which is not the result of luck, but of someone who had studied his own limits with the kind of focused attention most people never bring to anything. When you ask him how he sustained it, he doesn't reach for language about willpower or resilience or any of the things you might expect. He says simply that the woods gave him something the world outside never had, and the word he uses for it is peace. The end came in April of 2013, when Terry Hughes finally installed a motion-activated alarm system at a camp kitchen that had been broken into multiple times before. The alarm triggered in the early hours of April, and when Hughes arrived and moved through the dark toward the building, he found a small, bearded, middle-aged man standing in the kitchen holding stolen food, wearing layers of worn clothing, blinking in the light. Hughes identified himself as a game warden, and Knight set down what he was holding without resistance. And when Hughes asked him his name, the first word Christopher Knight spoke to another human being in 27 years was simply quietly, "Hi." He was arrested and charged with more than 100 counts of burglary and theft, and the reactions from the people whose cabins he had entered over the years were startlingly varied, ranging from genuine anger and a sense of violation to an almost inexplicable sympathy, with several victims admitting that they had suspected for years it was a person out there and had deliberately left food in accessible places, hoping he would find it. Knight pleaded guilty, served his sentence, and was eventually released. After his arrest, journalists came from everywhere looking for the same thing, the clean explanation, the diagnosis that would organize the whole story into something understandable. A journalist named Michael Finkel spent months with him and eventually wrote a book about it called The Stranger in the Woods, and what he found was that Knight would answer questions carefully and then pull back from the meaning behind them, offering details while withholding interpretation. Because the truth was that Knight himself didn't have the tidy explanation everyone was looking for. What he said was that he hadn't been happy in the world, so he left it, and that he hadn't felt lonely in the woods, and that over time silence had become so completely his natural state that human sounds, voices, and traffic and crowds, and all the ambient noise of ordinary life had become something his nervous system simply couldn't tolerate anymore. Not as an inconvenience, but as something genuinely overwhelming. He mentioned occasionally thinking about Thoreau during those years, the philosopher who famously retreated to Walden Pond to live deliberately in solitude, and then said something that has stayed with me, which is that he found Thoreau too social. Thoreau received visitors, went into town regularly, and ultimately wrote a celebrated book about his experience. Christopher Knight considered that far more human contact than he was interested in. The psychiatrist found nothing. No schizophrenia, no dissociation, no paranoia, no condition that would explain or excuse what he had done. He was sane, and the choice had been a real one, made with full awareness and carried out with a consistency that is almost without parallel in modern life. Here's what keeps pulling me back to this story. Almost everyone, at some point, has felt some version of the pull he acted on. Not the full version, not 27 years in the Maine wilderness, but the smaller and more private version that arrives after a difficult stretch. The quiet wish to simply stop being available, to let the noise recede, to disappear for a while into something still and uncomplicated. Most of us feel that and then make a cup of tea and get back to our lives. Knight felt it at 20 years old and drove to a dirt road in Maine and never came back. And by the time the world caught up with him, he had become a middle-aged man who had outlasted 3 presidential administrations and the entire rise of the internet without noticing any of it. What's striking is that he didn't frame the leaving as a mistake, even after everything. He expressed regret for the harm caused by the stealing, and he understood that his actions had affected real people in real ways. But the underlying decision to go, the choice itself, he never once said he wished he hadn't made it. When Finkel pushed him towards some larger reflection on what the years had meant, some insight or wisdom that 3 decades of solitude must surely have generated, Knight thought about it for a while and then said something close to, "I'm not sure I thought that deeply. I just lived." Christopher Knight is still in Maine, living quietly somewhere, by all accounts still deeply uncomfortable with noise and crowds and the texture of social life that most people move through without thinking about it. He hasn't written anything, hasn't sought any kind of platform, hasn't tried to turn what happened to him into a story he can sell. The world moves faster every year and gets louder every year and more demanding and more inescapable, and somewhere in that same state there is a man who looked at an earlier and quieter version of all of it at the age of 20 and decided it still wasn't something he could live inside, and then did something about it that almost no one in human history has ever actually done. He has never fully explained why, and maybe that's because any explanation he could offer would only make sense to someone who has already felt the thing he felt, and for anyone who has felt it, even slightly, even briefly, no explanation is really necessary at all.